Welcome back to the Physician's Guide to Doctoring. On this week's episode, we have a guest host, so please be the same respectful audience you are for me and enjoy. Hey there, it's Brad. As someone who's passionate about podcasting, I've always thought there should be more support for physicians who want to share their stories and expertise. That's why we're launching Doctor Podcast Network.
We're bringing together a community of physician podcasters with one goal in mind: to provide the tools, connections, and resources you need to grow your show. So whether you've been podcasting for a while or maybe you're just starting, we've designed this network to support you every step of the way, and we're going to help each other rise, not compete.
If this sounds like something you'd benefit from, we'd love for you to join us as we get closer to launch. So you can sign up at drpodcastnetwork.co for early access. Stay tuned for more details in the coming weeks. Really looking forward to what we can create together. Doctor Podcast Network, where doctors podcast.
Doctor Podcast Network, where doctors podcast.
Doctor Podcast Network, where doctors podcast.
Hey, this is Brad Block, host of the Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle.
Welcome, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Kristine Goins, and today we are so honored to have Dr. Noshene Ranjbar as an associate professor of psychiatry at the University of Arizona and a passionate advocate for health equity. Dr. Ranjbar is shaping the future of mental health. Her work spans from advancing integrative psychiatry to building culturally sensitive mental health programs for Native American and immigrant communities. Dr. Ranjbar's leadership is a testament to the power of embodiment and connection, and we cannot wait to explore her insights on women-embodied leadership. Dr. Noshene, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's an honor to connect with you in this way. And greetings to whoever is watching or listening.
Thank you so much. So I would just love to start by asking the first question that popped into my head when I heard about your work, and that was, what is women-embodied leadership?
One that I am continuing to learn about as it evolves in my own mind and body and heart. You know, the best way that I can describe my understanding of embodied leadership is an integrative, holistic mind, body, spirit of community building, leading, and bringing one's voice, utilizing one's agency and power to be a source for change for the better in a decolonized, honoring indigenous wisdom, honoring the earth and the environment and the people's voices while doing it. That's the first thing that I think of when I think of embodied leadership at this point.
Beautiful. And I'm wondering, when you provide that definition, I mean, it sounds like it grows from personal experience as well. Can you maybe share how your life experiences have shaped your current understanding and practice of embodied leadership?
Several ways that my life and professional experience has led me to understand embodied leadership in this way includes, first of all, being born and raised in Iran. I was 2 years old when the Islamic Revolution took place in Iran. So I grew up with a new reality where the oppression of voices of women, of minorities of all forms, religious, gender, sexuality, belief systems, was really the name of the game. Leaders were, and I think not just in the post-Islamic Revolution Iran, but unfortunately in much of the world, power hungry, concerned about themselves and making sure they stay in power, much more than serving the community and being in touch with what the actual needs of the people they are leading. So I grew up in that system for 10 years. I was 12 when I left, and I was 2 when the revolution happened. So I watched my mom suffer. I watched all the people around me suffer. I watched voices shutting down and getting quieter and quieter of any dissent, any disagreement, any power other than the corrupt power of the leaders. And then from there, I moved to the US, where as an immigrant, adolescent who didn't speak English, who never lived outside of that oppressed culture, living in the US for the first time. And it took a while for me to see similar patterns in the US. So I remember as a 7th, 8th, 9th grader in Richmond, Virginia, reading history of the US and reading about, how amazing Christopher Columbus was and how, great this nation is and how liberating the Civil War was and how the voices of justice won. And I read a lot of things that later I came to see that was not the full story. That leadership, even in this country, and not just in certain places, but much more than met the eye, was also about one's own benefits, one's own belief system's benefits, and not necessarily in touch with that embodied way of actually feeling what's going on and sensing, intuiting, and being the voice of the people as the leader. And then I saw the same thing eventually in medicine, where here I was excited about becoming a healer and a doctor and helping people. And then what I saw in leadership and healthcare, who decided what gets taught in medical schools, who decided what gets practiced when grandma and grandpa on the Navajo Nation go to see the doctor at the Indian Health Services, who decided who gets paid, what gets covered and what doesn't get covered for medications, for surgeries, for whatever. Again, I saw the same thing, that here is this incredible field of healing and medicine and teaching, and it is run by a leadership that is self-centered, colonized in its thinking, and profit-based, not for the profit of the people, but for the profit of a very few. And so these are just 3 examples of many times that in religious circles and many other places, I have been disenchanted with who you look up to as a leader and what ends up actually happening in reality. So I would say all of those things have brought me to continue to understand what is this different way that systems need to be run, led. And the definition continues to evolve because I think we're all trying to learn and figure it out.
Yes. I mean, it sounds like there are so many different experiences, contexts that have brought you to this place of embodied leadership. And of course, it sounds like it continues to unravel and evolve over time. Leadership often comes alive in these moments of impact. I'm wondering if you can share an example of how you've been able to apply embodied leadership in your work.
Well, I would say one example is within the field of psychiatry and integrative psychiatry. I came into medicine thinking I wasn't sure what I was going to go into. I initially went into family medicine. Then I had a breakdown/breakthrough moment, as Brene Brown puts it, and left family medicine and was kind of lost, looking for my own healing for 5 years. And then eventually stumbled upon psychiatry, came back to training, did my residency. And I didn't come into medicine or psychiatry per se because I thought it was so amazing and I wanted to do that. I actually came into the field because I had an embodied sensation, I can say that now looking back, that the capacity for mind, body, spirit integration in physical health, mental health, hopefully not dividing those two, but seeing the integrated whole was tremendous. Not just to be free of depression and anxiety or whatever, but for liberation of entire populations and cultures and people. And yet what I saw in medicine and medical school residency in how our field is practiced was more as spokes of a wheel. People who were trained to get a diagnosis as fast as possible, write a prescription as fast as possible without either having the experience of being held and healed and integrated ourselves, I should say, but also without knowing how to support that for the person coming to them. So like a missed opportunity, basically, for a career in a field that has so much capacity to be what our ancestors in the healing world probably hoped we would do in this day and age. And so that's what took me to psychiatry eventually. And then I was fortunate to be trained through the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine, and then the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, and then help create what is now the integrative psychiatry program that has 6 different sites currently at psychiatry residency programs around the US. And we also have a virtual elective where residents from all over the world can join us thanks to COVID and the virtual world and learn and practice and follow this more integrated, more holistic way to approach medicine and mental health, both for their own well-being and burnout prevention and resiliency and optimizing who they are becoming as leaders, as psychiatrists, as physicians, but also for the betterment of the communities that they serve. And I had no idea this is how this path was going to be, but I think my saving grace has been mentors who have held me throughout the process. My own healing journey has taught me to tune in and listen to what is needed or what the next step needs to be, and accept setbacks and kind of flow with what the natural evolution of this work has been. And I am so fortunate that I have, students and residents and fellows and colleagues and mentors all over the world who are now part of this movement that has a lot of work to do still. But I would say it's been a practice in an attempt towards embodied leadership for me as well.
Wow. And it sounds like you've been able to connect with so many others now coming after you who are wanting to learn more about this aspect of, I can't really call it new because it's been here for so long, right? Maybe more new to us who are learning and haven't maybe had it as a practice within our training. But it sounds like it's really a way of tuning in with the self and with taking into context the ancestors, those who have come before us, those who are in the communities that we're serving, and really what their needs are before focusing in on our own agenda when it comes to connecting with, leading, and working with communities.
Exactly.
And what other ways would you say embodied leadership differs from traditional forms of leadership? Like if, we're talking to other doctors who are trying to consider more concretely, like what steps they would take in terms of beginning to think about their leadership in a different way.
I've been sitting with this, a few notions that might be useful as we think about, because it's not an easy thing to wrap your mind around. It's not supposed to be something that one can just wrap one's mind around. Because the whole idea is that according to the kind of the history of how we think we got disembodied, it's really about a historical process of unhealed trauma. When trauma happens, the mind, the body, the emotions, the sensation, the intuition, the belief system can shatter. And so it takes healing, it takes community, it takes mentorship, examples, good healers, good friends, good community to help us put ourselves back together. And if you think about thousands of years of disembodiment in all of the world, whether it's the historical genocide of the Native Americans, whether it's what has been done to the continent of Africa or the Middle East, or you name it, the wars that we're going through right now, every time there is mass trauma, what happens right after is really important. So when the integration, the healing, the community coming together, the re-identifying what is healthy and what is whole doesn't have a chance to happen, you have a lot of disembodied populations out there. And one of the ways we survive disembodiment is we get stuck in our heads because we still have to survive and we still have to make our ends meet and feed our kids. And so there are a lot of disembodied men, women, and other genders running around in this planet. And I have been one of those. I'm definitely part of this mess that we have in our system. And so as I'm getting carried away answering your question, the process of healing ourselves, supporting our own community's healing is part of what is needed to then be an embodied leader that others are inspired by or use an example or reach out to for mentorship or support. And so part of that is acknowledging or even being aware of how we got to where we are, each of us, the strength, the resiliency, the beauty that helped us get to this moment in being a physician, a psychiatrist, a mother, whoever we are out in the world. But part of it is also beginning to find spaces where it's safe to acknowledge the wounds that we all carry, and then utilizing a variety of tools, healing methods, groups, opportunities, resources to support our own coming to our full embodied being, learning about our emotions and our behaviors and our neurobiology and our triggers and what makes us go back to some old patterns of perhaps unhealthy, unsustainable behaviors. And so tuning into our intuition, learning how to build that, how to honor that, learning how to become in tune to our body's wisdom, our body's constantly giving us messages. And most of the time we are using our brilliant mind to shut it down and not listen to it. And we pay for it later. Sometimes we realize and sometimes we don't. And so intuition, sensation, connect with our sense of liberation. What are some ways that we have remained quiet or out of balance or have not allowed to be our full self, and how to support ourselves, our community towards that sense of finding our voice and liberation and compassion, because none of us are going to do it perfectly and nobody is going to be all healed. No more work to do are probably the ones who are suffering and the most wounded. So I know in the indigenous traditions, the person who calls themselves a medicine woman or a medicine man is one to be wary of, because a leader never says, I am a leader. It's by practice and embodied living that people come to acknowledge this person as a servant, as one who has something to offer. And so the moment you see that ego voice saying, I am the one who did this and that, you can see that probably there's some wounds that haven't healed. And so to look for those tendencies within us that does the black and white, I am this and you're not that, the things that divide us, the things that separate us, mind, body, spirit, community, race, gender, religion, whatever. And also tap into what we're hearing from those around us, receiving feedback, what I'm doing is supporting you and what I'm saying, doing, behaving is getting in the way, so that there's that feedback loop, because we don't know everything. We might think we're doing the best thing, but until we see the results or we hear back from those we are influencing, we may be proven that there's some work to do.
And so, wow. I mean, there's so many different components and aspects of that, but it sounds like a very crucial aspect is being able to really tap in and be conscious about where you are in your own emotions, your own thoughts, your own journey of healing, because you need to be in that place of being connected with yourself in order to be able to help someone else. I feel like that is such an important aspect of even being able to do medicine that we don't often tap into. I think about almost the disembodied of being in medicine, where it took me, and I'm continuing to work on it, but like to learn when my body is hungry, when I'm thirsty, when I have to go to the bathroom, because of so many years, you're in a surgery, you're not going to leave. So like you literally have to learn how to ignore for so many years your fatigue or emotions that can be coming up for you in a moment, and to be able to reconnect with your body and your spirit in that way it really is a journey. So in a world that often values intellect over intuition, why is embodiment crucial in leadership, especially for women?
In my humble opinion, and I would say, according to what I continue to learn from indigenous ancient wisdom, there are multiple centers of knowing and awareness and wisdom in our body. I love the story I heard from I think it might have been, I don't remember which of my mentors and leaders at an integrative mental health conference, actually, who was sharing about showing up to vet a bunch of neuropsychiatrists to study compassion, study mindfulness, see what happens to these Buddhist monks' brains as they have meditated for and how that differs from the mind of the rest of us, or, the neurocircuitry. And this gentleman was sharing that he got there with all of his MRI machines and CAT scans, and there are 100 Buddhist monks sitting there. And he started talking about how we're going to put you in the MRI. We're going to check out what's going on with your brains. That's so unique. And then we're going to use that to tell everybody they should meditate. And all of the monks start laughing uncontrollably as a whole group. And this guy who doesn't understand the language and what they're laughing at asks his friends, "What did I say that's so funny? And why are they laughing?" And the monks, that we are just so tickled because here you've come all the way from the developed world, and you are going to be studying our brain to see what is happening when we meditate. And you are missing that the heart is where you should be looking, not the brain. Because the compassion center of energy and love and embodiment is not up there, it's down here. And what those male monks didn't say is that there's other centers, in the solar plexus and in the womb and in all of the centers of energy, all the chakras, as the East Indians name it, are centers of wisdom and knowing. So the mind, the way we think of it in the modern Western world, is only one part of what true knowing and wisdom and information is, and of colonization, because of the disempowerment of women, because of all the wars and unhealed traumas. The wisdom of the womb, the wisdom of the belly, the wisdom of the heart have gone unnoticed for hundreds of years. And so if you ask truly connected indigenous people, they know this. We know this, that the body has more wisdom than what the double-blind, placebo-controlled study is able to come up with, because that's not the full story. And so when you try to use measurements that are missing what needs to be unveiled and revealed, you're likely to not get the full story. And when the majority of the world's population's voices have been oppressed and suppressed, and only voices of a few and their opinions and their research has made its way to policy and science and medicine and whatever, you get the world that we live in. And so embodiment is really, it's our survival. It's connecting back to the mother of all the earth, who has put up with us for I don't know how many thousand years, but she is not going to forever if we don't get embodied and connected and stop separating ourselves from her, from ourselves, from each other. And that has repercussions for our whole planet, for our children and grandchildren for thousands of years to come.
Absolutely. And when you talk about some of the systemic barriers that are in place in terms of navigating leadership, and especially as women, and also coming from different backgrounds that are not the majority, how do you think that we can begin to navigate some of these obstacles to leading in this way?
Grassroots, community-based, non-hierarchical forms of giving, receiving, sharing, building, creating. I think of if we wait for some leader to come to save us, we will destroy ourselves. And I think part of embodiment, coming back to this mysterious word, is recognizing that within each of us is the universe. Within each of our bodies is the universe. Within the earth is so much wisdom and so many things we can learn from how nature, the little ants work together, and the bees and the birds, and how they have no words, no, TikTok, no evidence-based medicine the way we think of it. And they have made it. They have figured out evolution. They have figured out, the most beautiful examples of what goes on in the natural world that did not include any of our so-called modern ways. We're actually destroying, unfortunately, a lot of what they've done. So I think part of embodied leadership, our survival, our thriving as humanity, is all about networks, all about collaborations, all about, sisters and friends and colleagues and whoever, aunties, getting together, planning something, supporting each other, getting feedback from the community. How did this go? Teaching each other what we're learning. And thank goodness that the internet has had that good influence that, we can truly connect with people all over the world. 90% of what I'm able to do these days is because I don't need to be there in person to connect and to empower and to mentor and to learn from other people. So I think that's where it's at. It's those community-based forums and trust-building relationships, because the leaders of our world, as we have known them, have not been trustworthy. So we need to rebuild what it means to trust each other, what it means to listen, to give feedback, to empower, to embody.
Yeah, that sounds like such an important process. Also, a part of that is really learning how to trust ourselves again.
Yes, as within, so without.
And so how does this connection of embodiment expand to other areas of life? Like, I'm thinking about, liberty, as you were talking about, like freedom, whether it's freedom in our careers, our personal lives, how we interact with each other globally. How can embodied leadership expand our freedom?
Well, I can give you a personal example. Ever since I left Iran 35 years ago, I had been completely distanced from my culture, language. I was working on adapting to the society, learning English, going to medical school, passing this exam and that exam. And at the same time as I moved to the US, I lost my mom to cancer. So I was 12 years old and I left my country and lost my mom and had to figure out, how to survive in a new world. And it has taken me 45 years and ongoing to recognize what the grief journey, the losses of how I have coped and tried to deal with things I didn't know how to deal with, how they've impacted me, and how they have, in addition to the pain and the suffering, instilled in me this incredible inspiration, motivation to support the liberation of my people in Iran. And I didn't realize it until recently when the woman life freedom movement in Iran broke out a couple of years ago. And up until then, I had been doing mostly work with indigenous communities, tribal communities all throughout the US through the Center for Mind-Body Medicine. These small group, large-scale trauma healing initiatives to support people to reclaim their culture, reclaim their body, reclaim their indigenous wisdom and lineage. And as I started to work, thanks to COVID, because of the internet and doing all the work virtually, I started to work with the women and children and people of Iran, of my own people that I have not seen. I have not been there in 35 years. And just in the past few years, this incredible network of healers, supporters, helpers, mentors has evolved, not just in Iran, but of Farsi-speaking people in Afghanistan and multiple other countries who are therapists, doctors, nurses, teachers, going through this mind-body curriculum and then supporting each other to support others, support victims of oppression, people who are imprisoned, people who are, going through a variety of health and other issues. And my truth is that my liberation and my continuing to do what I need to do to honor why Creator has put me in this universe is tied to the liberation of the people. And so it's like every time they continue to grow, they continue to find their voices, they continue to embody leadership for themselves, there are pieces of me that continue to heal. After 35 years, I finally had the courage to create a memorial for my mom. I had never had any kind of processing, really, just last week. What I'm seeing and feeling and sensing and intuiting is that the pain we carry, the wounds that continue to bother us are actually the openings, the doors towards the healing, the creation, the beauty that is to come. And so in all the ways that we have tried to avoid feeling the pain, numb it, medicate it, get rid of it, not talk about it, as much as those things have helped us survive, there is a deep sense of liberation within each of us that is tied to the liberation of so many others we don't even know. In indigenous ways, they talk about every human who does their healing work is impacting 7 generations before and 7 generations after. I feel in my own life, but also in the life of those I work with, every time we go to those places that before we were not willing to go within ourselves, doors open, and then it's like you have no idea what's going to happen after that. And it's so beautiful. And it's just one example, but it's my truth.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's really powerful how our own individual liberation is tied to so many others that came before us, that will come after us. In a way, it makes sense because we're all connected, but it's really, really powerful. And I think still brings back that, what you mentioned in the beginning, which it starts with you really coming to terms with the necessity of your own healing and being willing to go through that process.
Can I just say, how when you buy a new car, all of a sudden you see the same car everywhere. You're like, I never knew there were so many white Hondas out there or whatever. It's the same way when my experience has been that every time we go to a place that is new in our unconscious, in our journey, that needs to be looked at and has an opportunity to be transformed, we start meeting others who are either looking to get to that next step or have just reached it too. And there is opportunity for syncing together and collaborating. And this book, The Woman Embodied Leaders, that I think was the excuse of why we happened to connect on this day, was an example because I had been doing this work for, 15, 20 years. And I had no idea that there was a book being written. So, somebody reached out to somebody who told me, oh, there's this book. Would you like to contribute to it? And I was like, oh, what is this about? And I just received it a few days ago and started reading what all of my co-authors and colleagues have written. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there are all these incredible humans from every culture who are saying the same thing in a variety of ways that I'd never thought to think that way. From the Haida woman who wrote the foreword to, people talking about Jordan and Armenia and Kosovo and Bosnia and Iran and what's happening right here in the US. And it is so humbling. And at first I thought, why is the cover pink? I don't like the color. And, I had my own human reactions of why did I write this? And I didn't know what it was going to look like. But it's been really humbling to start reading it and realizing, wow, how did I find these people? How did they find me? How did we all end up, contributing to this incredible testament to the need and the power of embodiment? There's a spectrum. None of us have it. It's like we're all trying to learn together and support each other. Walk each other home.
What a beautiful, I just love the way that you describe this work. I mean, it's just really incredible. Dr. Noshene, I so appreciate you taking the time and sharing this space, sharing your knowledge, your insights with us. For those who are wanting to learn more about you, your journey, the work that you're doing, where can they find you?
Well, I am still learning how to truly be out there in the world, but I can be found on various social media things, including LinkedIn, Instagram. I don't know. I'm not so great with those things, but reading this book could be a wonderful way. I think my chapter in there is called Earth, Empowering All Relatives to Heal. And I have a website I can share with you if people want to support the healing work for the Iranian and Farsi-speaking people's liberation. I am a voice for that. I'm honored to be a voice for that. And I'm happy to share some of those links and resources with you to share with whoever is moved to take a look or to be part of it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We will include those in the show notes. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This concludes our episode of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. Until next time, stay well and be free.
Thanks for listening. I have a favor to ask. You listened to the episode until the end, which means you either fell asleep or you really liked the episode. So please share it or like it or comment on a social media post. Or write us a 5-star review, something. It would really help me out. And maybe what you learned from this episode can help someone else too. The views expressed in this episode are those of the interviewer and interviewee and don't represent the views of their employer or even their significant other. Even though the magic of podcasting make it sound like I'm talking directly to you. This is not a doctor-patient relationship, and this is not medical advice or financial advice or really any advice. Thank us again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.